Things that science doesn't know. But if science doesn't know something, there's absolutely no reason to think that religion does know it. We mustn't fall into the trap of thinking that there's a kind of religious default which we default to when science can't provide the answer. Science is working on the answer. Science, in some cases, may never get the answer, but that's absolutely no reason to think that therefore we default to the religious answer. Certainly not.
Well, what if I'm wrong? I mean, anybody could be wrong. We could all be wrong about the flying spaghetti monster and the pink unicorn and the flying teapot. You happen to have been brought up, I would presume, in the Christian faith. You know what it's like not to believe in a particular faith because you're not a Muslim, you're not a Hindu. Why aren't you a Hindu? Because you happen to have been brought up in America, not in India. If you'd been brought up in India, you'd be a Hindu. If you were brought up in Denmark in the time of the Vikings, you'd be believing in Wotan and Thor. If you were brought up in classical Greece, you'd be believing in Zeus. If you were brought up in Central Africa, you'd be believing in the great Juju up the mountain. I mean, there's no particular reason to pick on the Judeo-Christian God in which, by the sheerest accident, you happen to have been brought up, and ask me the question, what if I'm wrong? What if you're wrong about the great Juju at the bottom of the sea? I think if you believe something without evidence, then that justifies anything. You're no longer vulnerable to somebody coming back at you and saying, hang on a minute, let me argue the case. If you believe it without evidence, which is what faith is, then you don't argue the case. You say, no, I'm not arguing that case. This is my faith. It's mine. It's private. I don't dissent from it. I don't retreat from it. You're just going to have to accept it. Now, that is evil. For myself as a scientist, I'm accustomed to saying that the thing that I really object to about religion is that it teaches us to be satisfied with not understanding, teaches us to be satisfied with pseudo-explanations which are really not explanations at all, things that sound good. Things that sound like an explanation but which really aren't, which appeal to the emotions but don't actually explain anything. So I think that religion in that sense can be the enemy of science, the enemy of truth. But this evening I'm reflecting more that what may really be the enemy of truth and the enemy of science is willful obscurantism, whether it comes from religion or not.
My question is for Professor Dawkins. Considering that atheism cannot possibly have any sense of absolute morality, would it not then be an irrational leap of faith, which atheists themselves so harshly condemn, for an atheist to decide between right and wrong?
Absolute morality, the absolute morality that a religious person might profess would include what? Stoning people for adultery, death for apostasy, punishment for breaking the Sabbath. These are all things which are religiously based absolute moralities. I don't think I want an absolute morality. I think I want a morality that is thought out, reasoned, argued, discussed, and based upon, I could almost say, intelligent design. Can we not design our society which has the sort of morality, the sort of society that we want to live in? If you actually look at the moralities that are accepted among modern people, among 21st century people, we don't believe in slavery anymore, we believe in equality of women, we believe in being gentle, we believe in being kind to animals. These are all things which are entirely recent. They have very little basis in biblical or Quranic scripture. They are things that have developed over historical time through a consensus of reasoning, sober discussion, argument, legal theory, political and moral philosophy. These do not come from religion. To the extent that you can find the good bits in religious scriptures, you have to cherry pick. You search your way through the Bible or the Quran and you find the occasional verse that is an acceptable profession of morality, and you say, look at that, that's religion. And you leave out all the horrible bits. And you say, oh, we don't believe that anymore, we've grown out of that. Well, of course we've grown out of it. We've grown out of it because of secular moral philosophy and rational discussion.
Tony Burke.
And I think that's probably what religions are. I think they are a sort of computer virus which spreads because they contain within their own code the instructions for spreading. Believe in me and pass it on to your children. I mean, that's a powerful piece of computer virus code. Believe in me and go out and spread the word as a missionary. Believe in me and you will have everlasting life.
Is there something in particular that really you can't stand about God?
About?
God.
Well, I don't think God exists, so obviously that wouldn't apply. There's something I can't stand about Christianity, which is just what I've been saying about this really obnoxious doctrine of original sin, which I think is actually hideous and demeaning, and it's a vengeful doctrine. It's the idea that that one can be absolved, that a sin by somebody else has to be paid for by a different person, which is a horrible idea. Everything about it is an obnoxious doctrine.
I think that religion teaches people to stop questioning. I'm sure you disagree with that, but the way I see it, it is such a privilege to be born at all. It's a very improbable event that either of us were born. We have the privilege of being in this universe for a few decades, and during that time it is an enormous privilege to be able to understand something about the universe in which we live, why we're here, why we were ever born, where we come from. And I think that is such a wonderful thing to be able to do that I am hostile, I can get angry about competing accounts which seem to me to not encourage that kind of questioning, but instead to say, this is how it is, it's all written in the Holy Book, it was written 2,000 years ago, and that's the end of it. I think that deprives people. I think that is such a belittling, a demeaning view of the universe, and I think it's tragic that children are brought up with that when they could be brought up in a more open-minded way. So that's one reason for the anger. The other reason we've touched upon, it is that I do think that faith, unsupported by evidence, is a lethal weapon. Doesn't have to be, of course it doesn't have to be, but it can be. It's a weapon because possibly unscrupulous people can get hold of often young men and use them as weapons, use them as human bombs. And the only reason they can be deployed as human bombs is that they have been brought up from childhood onwards to believe implicitly, without question, that whatever the particular religion is, the details don't matter. The point is that they do believe that it is the will of God that they should detonate themselves and blow up a busload of people or blow up a skyscraper in New York. I don't think that any kind of reasoned argument would do that to people.
What finally baffles me is the way our society, all of our society, has limply bought into the idea that faith should somehow be treated with exaggerated respect. As I said before, even secular individuals have come to accept the idea that faith should somehow be immune to criticism, simply because it is faith. Where you would gladly criticize somebody's political views or their artistic taste or their football team or their views on hunting or gun ownership or something like that, when it comes to faith, we are all expected to back off and say, no, no, we can't criticize faith. It isn't done. It's not good manners to criticize faith. Well, I think it's about time we started criticizing faith. The truth is that without this convention of good manners which pervades our society, faith couldn't withstand criticism because it has no resources with which to do the withstanding. How can you defend a position when there are, by definition, no arguments in its favor? So my suggestion is that we should henceforth abandon our social convention of automatic respect for religious faith.